Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Okay, let's unpack this. More and more people in Taiwan are saying there are really only two players left on the field, the EPP and the CCP. It sounds kind of out there, right?
Okay.
But when you start looking at the way things are going in Taiwanese politics and the constant dance with China, you can see why some folks are feeling that way.
It definitely sounds like a dramatic take at first glance. But as we've gone through the material, this feeling really highlights some very real worries and observations about the current political climate in Taiwan.
Yeah.
It's not just something people are, pulling out of thin air.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're trying to get our heads around this idea that the CCP is everywhere in Taiwan. We want to figure out why some people are starting to see the political scene as narrowing down to just the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, and the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
Yep.
It's almost like the other parties, like the Kuomintang, the KMT, and the Taiwan People's Party, the TPP, are getting squeezed from both sides. We've got a bunch of articles and research here looking at this, and our goal is to really dig out the most important stuff for you so you can understand where this idea comes from and what it might mean down the road.
And it's crucial to remember that the sources we've looked at offer different angles on this.
Yeah.
We'll be examining how the KMT and TPP engage with China, the challenges the DPP is facing, and the broader sense of China's influence in Taiwan. Our aim is to put all these pieces together, give you a clearer picture of what's really going on.
All right, so let's jump into this whole Taiwan only has two parties idea. What's the main argument behind that? It feels pretty extreme, so what's making people say it?
Well, the central argument, as we see it in the online discussions and some of the analysis here, is that a significant number of Taiwanese are starting to see the KMT and the TPP as increasingly, echoing the positions of the CCP.
Echoing them? How so?
Which leads to this feeling that the DPP is becoming the only major party truly standing up for Taiwan's autonomy and its own identity, especially when you look at the pressure coming from Beijing.
Okay, so it boils down to who's seen as pushing back against the CCP the most.
Pretty much, yeah.
Let's zero in on the KMT for a second. They've been around a long time, and their relationship with the mainland has definitely shifted over the years. What are the specific things making people think they're pro-China?
Well, the history between the KMT and the CCP is definitely a big part of it. Since that meeting between Lian Chan and Hu Jintao back in 2005.
Right, the Lin Hu meeting.
Exactly. There's been a clear trend towards more interaction. And more recently, Mi Yingju's trip to China really stands out.
That caused a stir.
It did. The fact that he didn't explicitly mention the Republic of China during his visit really cemented this perception for a lot of people. It felt like he was almost going along with Beijing's narrative.
Yeah, I remember that causing a lot of talk. It's those symbolic things that can be really powerful, right?
Absolutely.
But it's not just about history. What about things they're doing or saying now?
Exactly. And that's where Ko Wen-jae, who leads the TPP, also gets a lot of scrutiny. His talk about a cross-strait family, well, it sounds very similar to the kind of language the CCP uses. And some people see his reluctance to directly criticize threats from the CCP as a sign that he's aligned with them, or at least, not willing to push back hard.
Okay.
Then you also have situations in the legislature where KMT and TPP members have either opposed or tried to delay defense spending proposals.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We're talking about actual decisions being made. Can you give me a concrete example of that, like the defense budget stuff?
For sure. Take the proposed cut to the budget for the Hunter Owl project. That's about NT $4.68 billion for 2025.
Right.
The reasoning some in the KMT gave for this cut had to do with questions about how effective the project is and how transparent it is. Standard budget scrutiny, maybe.
Right.
But critics immediately connected this to the CCP's interest in Taiwan being weaker. They suggested that these budget cuts, even if that wasn't the explicit intention, play right into Beijing's hands.
So it's not necessarily that they want Taiwan to be weaker, but their actions are being interpreted that way by a lot of people. Is that fair?
That's a crucial point. Whether it's the actual goal or not, these kinds of actions are seen by many as being in line with what Beijing would prefer.
Okay.
And it's not just about defense. There's also this proposed change to the Offshore Islands Development Act.
Oh, yeah, the thing about Kinmen. What's the story there?
So this proposal, which was brought forward by KMT legislators like Chen Yu-chen, suggests creating a special free trade demonstration zone in Kinmen.
Right.
The idea is to make it easier for Chinese businesses, money, goods, workers, and services to come in. The worry is Well, the worry is that this could be used as a way to disguise where Chinese goods are really from. So they can avoid tariffs and sanctions from other countries.
Washing origin. That sounds pretty shady. So basically, Chinese products could come in looking like they're from Kinmen.
Exactly. And critics point out that this isn't a new concern. There were similar fears when the KMT was pushing for free economic zones back in, 2013 and 2014?
Right, I remember that discussion.
The concern is that this could hurt Taiwan's reputation when it comes to international trade rules and potentially damage its relationships with key trading partners. It looks bad.
Right, so on the one hand, you've got these actions from the KMT and TPT that are raising red flags for some people. What about the DPP? How do they fit into this idea of just two parties?
Well, the DPP has consistently emphasized Taiwan's sovereignty, the need to strengthen its ability to defend itself, and the importance of building stronger relationships with democratic countries, especially the United States.
Okay.
Given the increasing pressure from the CCP, the military threats, the economic pressure, this stance very clearly positions the DPP as the main force standing against China in the eyes of many Taiwanese.
So it's almost by default, because they're the ones who are most vocal about pushing back.
That's a big part of it, yeah. Their consistent messaging and policy decisions that prioritize Taiwan's unique identity and security naturally lead to them being seen as the main counterweight to the CCP's influence.
Now, we're talking about how people see things. How does the internet and social media play into this feeling that there are only two parties? Because online discourse can get intense.
Oh, definitely. The political conversation online in Taiwan, just like in a lot of places, tends to be very simplified and often very polarized. This idea of a two-party system gets amplified online through the language people use. Everything gets framed as a choice between anti-CCP, which people online often equate with supporting the DPP,
right,
or being pro-CCP, or even a CCP proxy if you agree with the KMT or TPP on certain issues. It's very binary.
Can you give me an example of what this looks like online? Like what kind of comments?
You see comments like, the blue and white parties are just helping the Communist Party get their message across, or the only party that truly represents the Taiwanese people is the DPP. These kinds of statements, while they obviously don't capture the full complexity of the situation, are very good at quickly communicating a certain viewpoint and reinforcing this idea of a simplified political landscape.
Yeah.
It's like choosing sides in a sports game, but with much higher stakes, obviously.
Okay. I can see how that kind of language spreads really fast online. But what are the potential downsides of this two-party view? Does it actually hurt Taiwan's political system?
There are definitely dangers, yeah. Oversimplifying the political landscape like this can undermine Taiwan's multi-party system and its democratic values. That's a big one.
How so?
Well, it can alienate voters who are in the middle, people who might not agree with everything the DPP does, but also very concerned about getting closer to the CCP. Feel like they don't have a place.
Right. The moderates get squeezed out.
Exactly. Perhaps the biggest concern is that it can lead to even more political division. If the public conversation becomes just pro-DPP equals loves Taiwan, anti-DPP equals CCP, it becomes much harder to have productive conversations and find common ground on important issues. This kind of rigid division could make it harder to address crucial domestic issues or present a united front internationally, no matter how the actual political views are spread out.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like this perception, even if it's not entirely accurate, has real consequences for how people see their political choices.
Definitely.
So we've talked about why this two-party idea is gaining traction. Now let's switch gears and talk about the actual realities and some of the underlying concerns. We need to look at the DPP's own challenges, right? Because no political party is perfect.
Absolutely not. While the DPP is often seen as the strong anti-China force, they definitely have their own internal and external challenges. One area that has caused significant concern recently is the number of alleged espionage cases within the DPP itself.
Wait, really? That seems counterintuitive given their strong stance against the CCP. Can you give me some examples?
Yes, there have been several instances that have come to light. For example, there was the investigation into Ho Chen-che, who was an assistant to Wu Qiaoshi. Then there was Wu Xiangyu, who was an advisor to the presidential office, and even Sheng Chuying, an assistant to legislator Lo Mailing.
Wow.
And more recently, there have been reports about Chu Shi-wan at the DPP's Democracy Academy and Huang Chuzheng, who was a special assistant to a new Taipei city councilor. It's quite a list.
That is a significant number of cases. What were they supposedly involved in? leaking things?
The allegations include things like leaking confidential information and helping to facilitate pro-CCP activities. Yes.
Yeah.
And these cases have understandably led to online reactions, questioning how genuine or effective the DPP's anti-China stance really is.
I can imagine.
You see comments online saying things like, the DPP is full of spies, the whole party has been infiltrated. Now, that's probably an exaggeration.
Sure.
But it definitely shows a real concern and a sense of irony given their public image.
Yep.
It makes you wonder about their internal security and, frankly, who they're trusting.
Right. It definitely throws a wrench in that simple narrative. Now, let's go back to the KMT and TPP. We talked about the perception of them being close to the CCP. What about the actual possibility and the worries that the CCP might be actively trying to infiltrate these parties?
This is a really critical question, and the information we have definitely gives us some things to think about. When it comes to the KMT, their long history of interactions with the CCP since 2005, well, it definitely creates an environment where influence would be exerted.
Okay.
Also, the fact that some prominent KMT figures have significant business interests in mainland China could potentially be used by Beijing as leverage.
Economic ties as leverage.
Exactly. And we've already talked about the proposed Offshore Islands Development Act as one area where there are concerns about potential CCP economic influence.
And those KMT delegations that go visit Beijing, like Fu Kunji's trip with a group of legislators and Xie Lian's meetings, how are those seen by the public? Does that fuel the fire?
Oh, absolutely. These visits often face a lot of criticism and are sometimes seen as kowtowing to Beijing.
Right.
The general feeling among some Taiwanese is that these interactions suggest the KMT is endorsing the CCP's agenda, or at least being too accommodating. Beyond these high-profile visits, there are also reports suggesting that the CCP might be trying to build influence within local KMT factions through things like businesses that import agricultural goods.
Yeah, interesting.
And by funding cross-strait exchange groups. It's like trying to build connections at all levels, from the top down and the bottom up.
So it's not just the big meetings, but also potentially more subtle local level efforts.
Exactly. And for the TPP, even though they're a newer party, the fact that their political ideology isn't as clearly defined in some areas could make them more vulnerable to being influenced, or at least perceived as such.
Because they're still figuring things out.
Sort of. And Kobenji's talk about a cross-strait family, which again sounds a lot like what the CCP says. 1.5 New Outlook is another phrase sometimes linked. Has certainly raised eyebrows.
And we had that situation with the former TPP official who allegedly took money from the CCP. That didn't help, I imagine.
No, definitely not. The Mochiwei case, where he was accused of accepting a significant amount of money, around $1 million from the CCP for election purposes.
Right.
Even though he was kicked out of the party, it definitely hurt the TPP's reputation and raised questions about who they're letting in and how well they vet people.
Sure.
There have also been controversies about TPP youth forums having links to members of the China Unification Promotion Party, which again makes people suspicious. And let's not forget Ko Wen-je's trip to Shanghai back in 2019, where he met with CCP officials. That trip at the time was criticized online as him putting on a pro-CCP performance.
So it seems like across the board, there are instances and ways that raise these concerns about the CCP trying to exert influence, or at least the perception of it.
Yes, the perception is strong, fueled by these specific examples.
What are some of the common methods that our sources say the CCP uses for this kind of infiltration or influence operation?
The sources point to several key strategies. One is directly funding individuals, media outlets, and academics who are seen as sympathetic to the CCP, often through various business entities and foundations, sort of indirect funding.
Okay.
They also use what's called cognitive warfare and media manipulation, spreading certain messages, discrediting others, amplifying division.
The info war stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then there's the approach of trying to build direct relationships and offer opportunities for collaboration with politicians, especially at the local level, as well as with retired military officials and people who have business ties to China. People who might be seen as influential or vulnerable.
Right.
They also try to use existing cultural and religious connections, like through Mazu pilgrimages, and work through grassroots organizations like farmers and fishermen's associations.
Wow, that's broad.
It is. Even seemingly innocent cross-strait youth exchange camps can be used to try and spread their political messages. It's a very comprehensive, multi-pronged approach.
It sounds like a very well-rounded, multifaceted effort. Now, let's zoom out a little bit. Why is there this widespread feeling of the CCP being everywhere in Taiwan? It's got to be more than just the political parties, right? What else feeds into it?
Absolutely. This feeling is deeply connected to the larger geopolitical tensions, especially the ongoing rivalry between the U.S. and China, with Taiwan being right there on the front line.
The strategic position.
Exactly. And specific actions by the CCP, like the increasing military intimidation with PLA aircraft, constantly entering Taiwan's air defense identification zone.
Yeah, those incursions.
And economic pressure tactics, like suspending some of the benefits under the ECFA trade agreement, they definitely contribute to this sense of an ever-present influence or threat. It's like a constant low-level hum of pressure.
And the CCP's long-term strategy, their united front approach, that plays a big role too, doesn't it? I feel like I hear that term a lot.
It's central to it. The United Front is all about trying to build a broad coalition of groups and individuals, both inside and outside China, who ultimately support Beijing's goals.
Okay.
And it operates through all the different channels we've been talking about: economic, cultural, religious, grassroots connections. It aims to co-opt and influence.
And all the news about spying.
Yes. The frequent news about alleged espionage cases, like the ones we discussed even within the DPP, understandably makes the public more concerned and contributes to this feeling of being surrounded by potential threats.
And what about information warfare? We hear so much about that these days, fake news and all that.
Information warfare and disinformation campaigns are a really significant part of this. Especially around election time, there are often accusations of coordinated efforts to spread fake news and manipulate public opinion.
Trying to sway votes.
Precisely. And there have been instances where the origin of some of this fake news has been traced back to internet addresses in China. It's a constant flood of information that can be really hard to sort through and figure out what's real and what's not. It creates uncertainty.
It's a lot to process. And I guess the DPP's own messaging, constantly talking about the China threat, while it might rally their supporters, probably also adds to this general feeling of the CCP being everywhere.
That's actually a very insightful point.
It's like constantly being reminded of a potential danger, which makes the danger feel bigger, maybe?
It could, yes. While the DPP's narrative of being the party that will resist China and protect Taiwan definitely resonates with a certain segment of the population, it also inevitably reinforces the idea of a pervasive and active threat coming from the CCP.
Right.
It's a complicated interplay between actual influence, perceived influence, and how that influence is talked about in the political arena.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Were there any other interesting bits from our research that we haven't quite touched on yet? Things maybe that offer a different perspective or nuance?
Yes, a couple of things worth mentioning. It's important to remember that some of these legislative Development Act are still ongoing. They haven't been finalized.
Ah, good point.
So the potential impact is still being discussed and debated. It's not a done deal.
Okay.
Also, there's increasing international attention and tighter rules around washing origin when it comes to trade, especially with the U.S.-China trade situation.
Right.
Taiwan, as a significant player in international trade, is generally committed to following international norms, which could act as a kind of brake on some of these concerns about Kinmen being used that way.
That's good to know that there are some external checks and balances potentially in play.
Exactly. And we shouldn't forget the role of civil society in Taiwan and the increasing media literacy among the public. People are getting better at spotting and countering infiltration and disinformation.
So grassroots efforts matter.
Definitely. There's a growing awareness, and various groups are working to promote critical thinking and identify misinformation. Our sources also highlighted how important it is for political parties to be transparent.
Yeah.
Transparent about their financial dealings with Chinese entities and when their officials visit China. More sunshine, basically.
Makes sense.
Strengthening and actually enforcing laws against infiltration, like the existing Anti-Infiltration Act, is also seen as a key step. The laws need teeth.
Right.
And finally, it's worth noting that there have been recall efforts launched against some legislators from the Blue Camp in Taiwan.
Oh, really?
Yes, which suggests that the public isn't necessarily happy with all of their actions and stances. The voters are paying attention and trying to hold their representatives accountable.
So the public isn't just sitting back and watching all this happen. They're engaged and reacting.
Precisely. There's a dynamic interaction between what the political parties do, the perceived threat from the CCP, and how the Taiwanese public and civil society respond to it all. It's not static.
Okay, so bringing everything together then, what are our main takeaways on this whole two parties and CCP everywhere situation? What's the bottom line, if there is one?
Well, it seems pretty clear that while there's no hard proof of the CCP having systemic complete control over either the KMT or the TPP.
Right, no smoking gun necessarily.
Exactly. But the fact that some of their positions are increasingly aligning or perceived to be aligning with what Beijing wants is definitely fueling public distrust. At the same time, the DPP isn't without its own problems and vulnerabilities, as we've seen with the recent espionage cases within its own ranks. That complicates the narrative.
Definitely.
Ultimately, the feeling that there are only two parties and that the CCP is everywhere really reflects genuine anxieties within Taiwan about its sovereignty and the significant influence of external powers. It's a symptom of a complex and tense geopolitical situation.
So it's more about the feeling and the concern, the anxiety, than necessarily a literal situation where there are only two real players calling all the shots.
I think that's a good way to put it, yes. And it suggests that going forward, the focus probably needs to be on carefully evaluating the actual policies and actions of all political parties based on how they truly impact Taiwan's core interests and democratic values.
Right.
Rather than just relying on simple, often polarizing labels.
Yeah, moving beyond the labels.
And being vigilant, being media savvy, and having strong legal frameworks in place are going to be crucial for protecting Taiwan's democracy in this challenging environment.
Okay, that gives us a lot to think about. So just to quickly recap, we dug into why there's this growing feeling that Taiwanese politics is becoming a battle between the DPP and the CCP. We looked at the policies and interactions of the KMT and TPP that are contributing to this view, as well as the DPP's own issues and the broader sense of the CCP's widespread influence.
And we explored how these perceptions, even if they are sometimes exaggerated or oversimplified online, are rooted in very real concerns about Taiwan's sovereignty and security, given its relationship with a much larger and often assertive neighbor.
Right. Now, for our final thought for you, our listener, think about this. In such a complicated global political landscape, how can the people of Taiwan best figure out who is really looking out for their best interests versus being swayed by outside forces?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is. And what role does having a strong, vibrant, multi-party system really play in making sure Taiwan stays resilient and keeps its democratic future secure? Something to chew on.
It's a question that requires all of us, observers and citizens alike, to keep thinking critically and stay informed.
Absolutely. Well, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights into this really important issue. If you have more questions or want us to dig deeper into any of this, definitely let us know.
We always appreciate the feedback.
And hey, don't forget to check out our buddy Micky's YouTube channel, Mickytolife, for some fun stuff when you need a break from all this heavy thinking.
Yeah, definitely check Micky out. Good stuff there.